The night was quiet, but inside his small rented apartment, a man sat awake, staring at a pile of unpaid bills on the kitchen table. He was a single father, and his days were longer than most people could imagine. By day, he took care of his little daughter. By night, he drove his old car, working as a driver, picking up strangers, and taking them home. He didn't complain. He couldn't afford to. Life had been unkind, but he had no choice but to fight back. His daughter, barely 8 years old, was already asleep in the next room. He had tucked her in with a kiss on her forehead, just like he always did, and promised her that tomorrow would be a better day. She always smiled at him with innocent trust, not knowing the weight her father carried on his shoulders. For her, he was the hero who made everything possible. For him, she was the only reason he kept going. Every morning started the same. He woke up early, made her a simple breakfast, sometimes just bread with butter, sometimes a boiled egg if they were lucky, and then walked her to school. He held her tiny hand tightly, proud that she still wanted to walk with him, proud that she still thought the world of him. On the way back, when he was alone again, reality hit him harder. His stomach would growl, but he would ignore it. Sometimes he skipped his own meals just to make sure she had enough to eat. Life had not always been this way. Once he had dreams. Once he believed the world would give him a fair chance. But when his wife left, unable to handle the weight of their struggles, those dreams shattered. Suddenly, he was both father and mother. Suddenly, he was the only shield his daughter had against the storms of life. Many nights, after putting her to sleep, he sat in silence, staring at the ceiling, asking himself how much longer he could keep fighting alone. But whenever he thought about giving up, he remembered her eyes, the way she looked at him when she needed help with homework, the way she hugged him tightly when he picked her up from school. That was all he needed. Her love was his strength. He told himself, as long as she smiles, I will never stop. Being a driver was not his dream job. He had never imagined this life for himself. But it was the only job he could do without a college degree, the only one flexible enough to let him take care of his daughter. The car he drove was old and worn out, with scratches on the sides and a heater that barely worked in the winter. Still, it was his lifeline. Without it, he had no income. He prayed every night that it wouldn't break down, because fixing it would cost more than he could afford. The city never slept, and neither did he. At night, he picked up all kinds of people, workers going home after a long shift, couples coming back from dinner, teenagers laughing after a party. Some treated him with respect. Others ignored him as if he didn't exist. A few were rude, but he stayed calm. He had learned patience. He had learned silence. What mattered was the money. Every ride meant food on the table, shoes for his daughter, maybe a little saved for her future. But even with long hours, money was never enough. Rent took most of it. School supplies, clothes, and groceries took the rest. He often wore the same shirts over and over, but he didn't care. As long as his daughter had what she needed, he could manage with less. He didn't want her to feel different from the other children at school. He wanted her to feel loved, safe, and normal. Sometimes, when he waited outside the school gates, he watched other families, mothers and fathers together, holding hands with their children, laughing freely. A small ache formed in his chest, but he quickly hid it with a smile when his daughter came running to him. She never noticed the sadness in his eyes, and he made sure she never would. Despite everything, he still believed in kindness. He believed in doing the right thing. Life had been unfair to him, but he refused to let bitterness take over his heart. If a passenger forgot their wallet, he waved it off. If someone was too tired to talk, he let them rest without asking questions. He treated everyone with respect because deep inside, he knew that kindness always found its way back. What he didn't know was that one small act of kindness, one late-night ride, was about to change his life forever. It would begin as just another ordinary night behind the wheel, but the passenger he would pick up that evening was not ordinary at all. She was someone powerful, someone wealthy, someone who had everything he didn't. Yet, in that moment, she would need him more than he needed her. And through a few unexpected words the next morning, his world, the world of a tired, struggling single father, was about to be turned upside down. But for now, as he sat in his kitchen, staring at those bills, All he could do was take a deep breath, put on his worn-out jacket, and get ready for another night of driving. He kissed his sleeping daughter on the forehead once more, whispered a promise to always take care of her, and stepped into the cold night. The road was waiting, and so was fate. The streets were quieter than usual that night. The clock on the dashboard showed it was almost midnight, and the man's eyes were heavy from hours of driving. Still, he knew he couldn't stop. Every extra ride meant a little more money, and that money could mean groceries for the week or paying part of the electricity bill. So he kept going, even when his body begged him to rest. The cold air outside fogged up the windows as he waited near a busy street lined with bars and restaurants. It was the kind of place where people came to forget their problems, to celebrate, or to drink away their stress. For him, it was a place where late-night rides were guaranteed. He leaned back in his seat, stretching his stiff neck, when suddenly the back door opened. A woman stumbled in, nearly losing her balance. Her perfume filled the car instantly, a mix of expensive fragrance and alcohol. She collapsed into the seat with a sigh, her head falling back against the cushion. "Where to?" he asked gently, adjusting the rearview mirror to glance at her. She waved her hand weakly, mumbling an address in a slurred voice. It was a luxury neighborhood on the other side of the city. He nodded and started the engine. As the car rolled forward, he glanced at her again. She was dressed in a sharp business suit, though it looked out of place in the late hour. Her high heels dangled from one hand, and her other hand rested on her forehead as if she were carrying the weight of the world. Even in her unsteady state, he could tell she was someone important, not the kind of person who usually sat in his back seat. Silence filled the car, broken only by the hum of the engine and the occasional honk outside. After a while, she spoke, her voice soft but heavy. "You know what's funny?" she muttered, her eyes half closed. "People think being at the top means you're happy. They think money, success, power, it's everything." She let out a small laugh, though it carried no joy. "But the truth is, it's lonely. So damn lonely." The driver didn't say anything. He wasn't the type to interrupt, especially not when someone was spilling out their heart. He just kept his eyes on the road, listening quietly. "I run a company," she continued, her words dragging from the alcohol. "Hundreds of employees. Everyone looks at me like I'm some kind of machine. Do this, fix that, make decisions. And when I walk into a room, they all go silent, waiting for me to tell them what to do. But nobody," she paused, swallowing hard, "nobody sees me. Just me, the human being." The man tightened his grip on the steering wheel. He didn't know what it felt like to run a company, but he did know what it felt like to be unseen, to be invisible. He had lived that life for years, working quietly, struggling silently, yet never truly being noticed by anyone except his little girl. She turned her face toward the window, her eyes glistening. "I drink because it's the only time I feel like I can stop pretending. The only time I don't have to be perfect." Her words sank deep into the quiet air. The man cleared his throat softly. "Sometimes," he said in his calm voice, "it's okay not to be perfect. Sometimes being human is enough." The woman looked at him through the reflection in the glass. For a brief second, her drunken eyes seemed to focus, as if his words had reached a hidden part of her. Then she blinked, leaned back, and whispered, "You sound like you know." He didn't answer. He didn't need to. The ride continued in silence after that. She drifted off, her head tilting to the side as sleep took over. He glanced at her again in the mirror. This woman who had everything he didn't, yet still felt broken inside. It reminded him that struggles were different faces. His were poverty and responsibility. Hers were power and loneliness. But in the end, pain was pain, no matter the form it took. When they reached the luxury neighborhood, he slowed down, carefully driving through the quiet streets lined with mansions. He pulled up to the address she had given. Her home was a large modern house with tall glass windows and lights glowing inside. "Ma'am," he said softly, turning back toward her. She stirred, groaning lightly as she opened her eyes. "We're here." She fumbled for her purse, but he noticed her hands shaking as she tried to pull out her wallet. Without a word, he gently reached over to steady the purse so she wouldn't drop it. She looked up at him then, her expression softening. "You're kind," she whispered. "Most people, they don't care." He just offered a small smile. "Get inside safely. That's what matters." She handed him the fare with unsteady hands, then paused. "What's your name?" He hesitated for a moment before answering quietly. She nodded, as if she were memorizing it, then whispered, "Thank you." With that, she stepped out, swaying slightly as she made her way to the front door. He watched until she disappeared inside, making sure she was safe before driving away. To him, it was just another passenger, another night, another ride. But what he didn't know was that this ride was going to follow him into the next morning. And the words she would speak after sobering up would be words that would change the course of his life forever. For now, though, he drove back into the city lights, tired but calm. Somewhere deep inside, he felt like tonight had been different. And he was right. Morning sunlight streamed softly through the wide glass windows of her modern home. The woman stirred in bed, her head pounding from the drinks of the night before. She pressed her hand against her temple and let out a groan. For a few seconds, everything felt blank, just the familiar fog that followed a long night out. Then, little by little, pieces of memory came back. A car ride, a quiet voice, a pair of eyes watching her through the rearview mirror, not judging, not mocking, just listening. She sat up slowly, still holding her head. It wasn't unusual for her to drink too much after a stressful day. But something about last night was different. She remembered talking, rambling even, about things she never told anyone. About how lonely it felt at the top. About how people saw her as a machine instead of a person. She couldn't believe she had let those words escape in front of a stranger. Yet strangely, she didn't feel embarrassed. She felt lighter. Her thoughts circled back to the driver. He hadn't spoken much, but when he did, his words carried a strange calmness. Sometimes being human is enough. That line replayed in her head like an echo. She frowned, realizing how rare it was for someone to see through her walls, even for a moment. She pushed herself out of bed and walked to the kitchen, pouring herself a glass of water. As she sipped slowly, she couldn't shake the feeling that she needed to know more about him. Who was he? What kind of man listens without judgment, without wanting anything in return? Her phone buzzed on the counter, full of work emails and missed calls. Meetings, deadlines, decisions. Her world was waiting for her as always. But for the first time in years, she didn't rush to answer. Instead, she found herself dialing the cab company. "Hello," she said when someone picked up. "I took a ride home last night. I'd like to know the name of the driver who dropped me off." The voice on the other end hesitated. "Ma'am, usually we don't give out personal details." "I'm not asking for anything private," she interrupted softly. "I just want to thank him." After a pause, the operator relented. "The driver's name is..." She repeated it quietly, letting the sound of it linger in the air. A name. Just a simple name, but it felt heavy somehow, like it belonged to someone she was meant to remember. For a moment, she stood in silence, holding the phone in her hand. Her heart beat faster, and she didn't even know why. Maybe it was guilt for burdening him with her drunken confessions. Maybe it was gratitude for his kindness. Or maybe it was something deeper, something she couldn't yet explain. She thought about the way he had made sure she got inside safely. The way he hadn't rushed her, hadn't shown irritation, even when she could barely speak clearly. He had treated her like a human being, not just another fare. And that mattered. More than she wanted to admit. By late afternoon, she had made up her mind. She couldn't just let it go. She wanted to see him again, not as a drunk passenger and a driver, but face to face, as two people. She wanted to thank him properly, with clear words this time. Meanwhile, on the other side of the city, the man was finishing his morning routine. He had dropped his daughter at school, walked back home, and collapsed on the couch for a short rest. The night had been long, and though he was exhausted, he couldn't forget the woman from last night. She had looked powerful, like someone who belonged to another world entirely. Yet she had spoken of loneliness in a way that made her sound just like him. He shook his head, pushing the thought away. To him, she was just another passenger. People came and went every night, each with their own problems, their own stories. His job was simple: drive, earn, survive. But deep inside, something told him that this woman wasn't going to fade into memory so easily. And he was right. Because even as he tried to forget, she was already on her way to find him. The afternoon sun had started dipping, painting the city streets in shades of orange and gold. The man sat in his car, waiting for his next ride request to come through. He rubbed his tired eyes and thought about how the day had gone so far. He had managed to grab a few hours of rest after dropping his daughter at school, but the weight of bills and responsibilities never allowed him to feel fully at peace. His stomach was half empty, but he was used to it by now. Just then his phone buzzed. A request appeared on the screen. The pickup location wasn't too far, so he accepted and started driving. He didn't know that this ride would be nothing like the others. When he pulled up to the address, he saw her standing there, the same woman from the night before. This time, she wasn't swaying or stumbling. She wasn't the tired, drunken figure he had helped into his car. She looked sharp, composed, and very much like the CEO she had claimed to be. But her eyes carried something different today, something softer. As she stepped into the back seat, he turned slightly in surprise. "You again?" he asked, his voice calm but carrying a hint of curiosity. She gave a small smile. "Yes. I asked for you." He frowned slightly. "You requested me?" She nodded. "I remembered last night. At least parts of it. I remember what I said. And I remember what you said too." Her voice lowered, steady but sincere. "I don't usually let myself talk like that. Especially not to strangers." He glanced at her in the mirror, unsure of how to respond. "People say things when they're tired," he said gently. "Or when they've had a drink." "Yes," she agreed softly. "But you listened. You didn't laugh. You didn't judge. Do you know how rare that is for me? People only hear me as a boss, not as a person. But you saw me." He cleared his throat and looked back at the road. "I just did what anyone would do." She shook her head. "No, not anyone. Most people wouldn't care. But you did. And I wanted to thank you properly, with a clear mind this time." The car was silent for a few moments, filled only with the sound of the city around them. He didn't know what to say. Gratitude was something he rarely received. He was used to people treating him like background noise, someone who existed only to drive them from one place to another. But hearing her words stirred something inside him, something he hadn't felt in a long time. Finally, she spoke again, her voice almost hesitant. "Tell me about you. Last night, I did all the talking. But I want to know who you are." He hesitated. He wasn't used to sharing his story. His life wasn't glamorous. It was filled with struggles and sacrifices. But something in her eyes made him believe she was truly interested, not just making polite conversation. So, he told her, not everything, but enough. About being a single father. About how his daughter was his whole world. About working long nights just to keep food on the table. She listened quietly, her expression never once breaking into pity or discomfort. Instead, she seemed moved, as if every word he said reached her deeper than he expected. When he finished, there was another silence, heavier this time. She leaned forward slightly and said something that would stay with him forever. "You think you're just surviving," she whispered, "but to me, you're living with more strength than anyone I know. You don't realize it, but the way you keep going, for your daughter, for yourself, that's real success. That's real power." Her words hung in the air, filling the small space between them. He felt his throat tighten. No one had ever said that to him before. No one had ever looked at him and seen more than just a struggling man behind the wheel of an old car. For years, he had carried the weight of the world in silence. But in that moment, sitting in his own car, he felt seen. Truly seen. He swallowed hard, gripping the steering wheel. "You don't know me," he said quietly. She shook her head. "Maybe not. But I know what I saw. And what I see now is a man who deserves more than what life has handed him." He didn't reply. He couldn't. His chest ached with emotions he had buried for too long. As the ride ended, she didn't rush out like most passengers. Instead, she placed her hand gently on the back of the seat and said, "This won't be the last time we talk. I mean it." And with that, she stepped out, leaving him with her words echoing in his mind. For the rest of the night, He drove through the city, as usual, but nothing felt usual anymore. Something inside him had shifted. For the first time in a long time, he felt like maybe, just maybe, his life was about to change. The days that followed felt different. The man continued his routine, waking up early, making breakfast for his daughter, driving long hours through the city. But his heart carried something new. The woman's words kept replaying in his mind. You think you're just surviving, but to me, you're living with more strength than anyone I know. He didn't understand why those words had struck him so deeply. Maybe it was because no one had ever said something like that to him before. Maybe it was because, for once, someone looked at him and saw more than a driver struggling to pay bills. Whatever it was, it gave him a strange kind of hope, a quiet strength that made the heavy days feel a little lighter. One evening, just as he was about to log out and head home, his phone buzzed. Another ride request. The address was familiar. It was hers. He hesitated for a moment, then accepted. When he arrived, she was already waiting outside, this time not in her work clothes, but in something more casual. She smiled warmly as she stepped into the car. I was hoping you'd accept, she said. He gave a small nod. Where to? Nowhere far, she replied. Just drive. I need a clear head. And so he drove through the city streets, past glowing streetlights and quiet neighborhoods. She sat in the back, watching the world outside, then finally leaned forward. I've been thinking about you, she said softly. He raised his eyebrows slightly in the mirror. About me? Yes. About what you told me. About your daughter. About how hard you work just to make ends meet. I can't stop thinking about it. He stayed quiet, unsure where she was going with this. You know, she continued, I've worked with hundreds of people. Talented, educated, ambitious people. But most of them don't understand responsibility the way you do. They don't understand sacrifice. They don't understand what it means to keep going, even when life gives you every reason to stop. That's rare. Her voice grew softer, more serious. And that's why I want to make you an offer. He glanced at her quickly before returning his eyes to the road. An offer. She nodded. I don't believe in charity. I don't want to help you like you're someone who can't stand on his own feet. But I do believe in giving opportunities to people who deserve them. And you, she paused, looking straight at him, you deserve more than driving strangers through the night, worrying about whether you can feed your daughter tomorrow. His grip on the steering wheel tightened. His heart beat faster. What kind of opportunity? He asked carefully. She took a deep breath. My company needs drivers. Not just any drivers, people who are reliable, trustworthy, people who can represent the values I want my business to stand for. Safety, responsibility, kindness. You showed me all of that in one night. If you're willing, I'd like to offer you a full-time position. Stable pay. Benefits. A future. The words hung in the air like a miracle he never thought he'd hear. For a moment, he thought he had misheard her. A steady job. Benefits. Security. These were things he had dreamed of, but never believed would actually come his way. His mouth went dry. Why me? He whispered. Her eyes softened. Because you reminded me that humanity still exists. Because in a city where everyone takes, you gave without asking. And because I believe people like you, the ones who live with integrity, deserve chances that life doesn't always hand out. He felt a lump rise in his throat. He had been through years of struggle, years of being invisible, years of people walking past him as though he didn't matter. But here she was, a woman who had every reason to ignore him, choosing instead to lift him up. He blinked hard, trying to steady his voice. I don't know what to say. Say yes, she said gently. For a long moment, he was silent. His mind raced with thoughts of his daughter, of the bills piled on the kitchen table, of the nights he had gone hungry just so she could eat. This was more than just a job. It was a lifeline, a doorway to a better future. Finally, he exhaled. Yes. Her smile widened, genuine and full of relief. Good. Then it's settled. The rest of the ride passed quietly, but it was not an uncomfortable silence. It was the kind of silence that comes after something life-changing, something too big for words. When he dropped her off, she placed her hand gently on the back of his seat again. "You're stronger than you realize," she said softly. "Don't ever forget that." That night, as he walked into his small apartment, his daughter ran to him, hugging him tightly, as she always did. But for the first time in years, he hugged her back with a heart full of something new. Hope. He knelt down, looking into her eyes. "Things are going to get better," he whispered. And this time, he truly believed it. The first day of his new job felt surreal. He woke up earlier than usual, but this time it wasn't from stress or worry. It was from excitement. He looked at the uniform neatly folded on the chair and couldn't believe it was his. For the first time in years, he had something stable, something that gave him dignity. His daughter peeked out from her room, rubbing her sleepy eyes. "Papa, why are you up so early?" she asked with a yawn. He smiled, kneeling down to her level. "Because today is a special day. Today is the start of something new for us." Her eyes lit up. "Does that mean you won't have to drive all night anymore?" He nodded, brushing her hair gently. "Yes. I'll still work, but now I'll be home more often. I'll be able to take you to school and pick you up too." She squealed with joy, wrapping her little arms around his neck. In that embrace, he felt more successful than any paycheck could ever make him. When he arrived at the company, he was greeted warmly, not like a stranger or a replaceable worker, but like someone who mattered. The CEO herself came down to see him. She wasn't in her power suit that morning. She wore a simple dress and carried a smile that looked genuine. "I'm glad you're here," she said. He bowed his head slightly. "Thank you for believing in me." She shook her head. "No, thank you for reminding me of the kind of values this company should stand for." The days turned into weeks, and slowly his life began to change. The paycheck came regularly, and with it, the constant fear of not making rent started to fade. For the first time in years, he could buy groceries without counting every coin. He could get his daughter new shoes when she outgrew her old ones, instead of patching them again and again. But more than the money, it was the stability that meant everything. He no longer lived in survival mode. He no longer had to choose between paying one bill and skipping another. He could breathe. At night, instead of dragging himself out to drive strangers until dawn, he now sat at the table with his daughter, helping her with homework. Sometimes they laughed over her drawings. Sometimes they just shared a quiet meal together. These were the moments he had always dreamed of, but never thought he'd have. One evening, as they sat on the couch watching a cartoon, his daughter leaned against him and whispered, "Papa, you're the best dad in the world." His throat tightened, and he kissed the top of her head. "I'm just trying my best for you," he replied softly. What he didn't say was that, for the first time, he actually believed her words. For the first time, he felt like he wasn't failing her. As weeks passed, his confidence grew. He wasn't just a driver anymore. He was part of something bigger. The CEO often stopped by to check in with him. Sometimes she asked how his daughter was doing. Other times, she simply thanked him for his hard work. Every time, he was reminded that this chance wasn't charity. It was trust, and he worked hard to honor that trust. One late afternoon, as he finished his shift, he caught sight of the CEO standing outside, looking thoughtful. She turned to him and said, "You know, that night when you drove me home, I thought I was just another drunk passenger in your car. But now I realize I was meant to meet you. Because you reminded me that success isn't about titles or money. It's about humanity." He looked at her quietly, unsure what to say. She smiled. "Sometimes fate works in strange ways. You gave me back a piece of myself that I thought I had lost. And I'm glad I could give something back to you in return." He nodded slowly. "You already did more than I could ever repay. You gave me a future, for me and for my daughter. That's something I'll never forget." As he walked away that evening, the city lights flickered on one by one. For years, those lights had felt cold, reminders of endless nights and endless struggles. But now, they looked different. They looked like hope. When he reached home, his daughter came running to him, laughing, her arms wide open. He lifted her up, holding her close, and in that moment, he realized something. Life didn't change because of luck. It changed because of kindness. His, in helping a stranger without expecting anything back, and hers, in seeing him for who he really was. One late-night ride, One simple act of humanity had rewritten their story forever. And as he tucked his daughter into bed that night, kissing her forehead gently, he whispered, "We're going to be okay now. I promise." This time, it wasn't just a promise. It was the truth.